The desert stretched endlessly beneath an amber sky, its surface a rippling sea of heat and silence. Sandstorms whispered across the horizon, and ancient stone monoliths jutted from the earth like half-buried teeth, weathered by centuries of wind. In the middle of this vast, alien emptiness, a shimmer in the atmosphere pulsed once, then again, and with a thunderless flash, they arrived. A crackling field of light deposited 6 figures onto the burning sand. 2 wore suits of seamless white armor, glowing blue visors flickering as they scanned their surroundings. 3 others, taller and inhumanly slender, exuded an eerie elegance, their flesh a smooth, organic sheen, their arms segmented and jointed in strange places. The 6th was human. Eli Hart stepped forward, squinting beneath the relentless sun. His boots crunched against the grit, the coarse grains already collecting around his laces. He carried nothing, not even a bag. His clothing was simple: cargo pants, a faded t-shirt, and a utility belt devoid of any tools. His expression was neutral, but his eyes moved constantly, absorbing every detail. A voice boomed across the desert, not from above, but from inside every mind present. It was flat, genderless, and ancient. "You have been chosen to participate in the survival trial of Solaria. No tools. No assistance. You will construct a shelter using only the natural materials around you. The structure must endure the elements for 2 solar rotations. Your time begins now." The shimmer vanished. The silence returned. Eli exhaled. The aliens looked at one another, their heads tilting at impossible angles, communicating in high-frequency clicks and pulses. The 2 armored beings, a race known as the Relari, activated scanning fields from their visors, but their interface returned static. Whatever this place was, it had been designed to negate all forms of advanced technology. Eli stepped away from the others, crouched low, and scooped a handful of sand. It slipped through his fingers like water. Useless by itself. But if he could find clay, maybe moisture in a shaded crevice, there might be a way to bind it. He glanced toward the base of a crumbling stone pyramid in the distance. There, the ground was darker. Behind him, a guttural shriek erupted. One of the insected creatures, the angular, brown-skinned Gonari, slammed its clawed limbs into the sand, digging with brute force. Another had already begun assembling pieces of stone into a rough heap, chittering instructions to its kin. No coordination. No plan. Just instinct and muscle. Eli didn't bother. He began walking toward the pyramid. The heat pressed down like a weight. Every breath was dry and tasted of metal. He reached the base of the ancient structure and dropped to his knees, brushing away the topsoil. The earth here was indeed different. He could feel a density beneath the sand, a compact layer of something heavier. Digging with his hands, he unearthed a thin crust of hardened sediment. It cracked like dry pottery. "Bingo!" he muttered. His fingers stung as he broke off chunks of clay and packed them into a small pile. Sweat traced lines down his spine. He rolled one of the chunks into a rough rectangle, then pressed it into the sand to mold a crude brick. Not perfect, but promising. He smiled faintly. A series of loud crashes echoed across the plain. The Relari had attempted to form a reflective dome using their armor plating and nearby stones, but the wind tore it down within minutes. One of them cursed in a clicking dialect and kicked the debris, sending sand flying. Eli returned to his task. He needed water, not much, just enough to bind the clay and sand into a stable mix. He scanned the landscape and noticed a blackened basin between 2 stone spires, where a thin vapor hung in the air. A condensation trap, possibly. He jogged toward it, hands coated in red dust. At the basin's edge, the air was cooler. Beneath the ledge, he found a trickle of moisture, almost nothing, but enough to dampen a cloth. He soaked the hem of his shirt and returned to his worksite, kneeling beside the clay pile. He added sand, pressed the mixture together, and began forming proper bricks. As the sun slid westward, Eli constructed a basic layout: low walls, no roof yet, but foundations firm. He buried the base layers to prevent collapse. The bricks dried quickly under the heat, hardening to a surprising resilience. It was primitive, but it worked. By contrast, the alien efforts floundered. The Gonari had dug a trench and covered it with thorny desert plants, but the heat cooked the interior like an oven. The Relari's second structure, made of laser-fused glass from melted sand, cracked from thermal stress. The others, fluid-bodied beings of uncertain form, had attempted to burrow underground but fled as the ground shifted, revealing subterranean tremors or life. By evening, shadows stretched long across the desert. Eli sat beside his wall, fingers cracked and raw, his body coated in fine dust. He sipped from a ration pouch, watching the others regroup. Tension was rising. The aliens watched him now, wary, perhaps curious. One of the insectoids approached, its mandibles twitching. It extended a thin arm and pointed to the wall. Eli nodded, understanding the question. He slapped his palm against the brick, then mimed the motion of shaping it. The insectoid mimicked the gesture, then turned and chirped to its kin. The next hour passed with silent cooperation. Two of the creatures began carrying clay to him. They didn't speak, but their movements were efficient. Together, they assembled a second row. Eli adjusted the angle of one section to funnel airflow, cooling through convection. Above, the sky turned blood orange. Small craft hovered far off, like judgmental stars, observers from the overseer. No one spoke, but everyone could feel the gaze. As darkness fell, the temperature plummeted. The desert cold swept in like a living thing. Aliens huddled behind fallen rocks. One of the Relari activated emergency thermal shielding from its suit, an apparent violation. A warning pulse struck the ground near them, sparking blue. The overseer was watching closely. Eli crawled into his partial structure. The walls held. Inside, the air was tight but still. He pressed himself into the corner and closed his eyes. The night passed with distant sounds, scuttling limbs, whispering winds, and the occasional groan of stress on unready structures. In his dreams, Eli saw cities made of sand, rising from the dust like memories. He saw hands, many hands, building together, lifting one another. Morning light broke, blinding in gold. Eli opened his eyes, blinked at the brightness, and crawled out. His shelter had held through the night. He turned to see the field. 3 alien shelters had collapsed. One Relari stood alone, its partner gone, presumably fled or worse. The insectoids clustered beside him, their antennae tilted toward the sun, motionless. Eli rose and walked to his structure. Wordlessly, he picked up the next brick and began again. Behind him, slow footsteps crunched the sand. The insectoid handed him a clay ball. Eli smiled. There was still a long way to go. But something had begun.
The sun rose higher, its light slicing across the dunes like a blade of fire. The shelter stood firm, imperfect, battered, but enduring. Eli ran his palm along the bricks, feeling the rough edges, the faint give in a few spots. It wasn't enough yet. 1 night was survival, 2 would be endurance. And that meant the structure had to breathe, to insulate, and to hold its shape under both searing heat and bone-deep cold. There wasn't time for error. The insectoids, for remained now, watched him with a cautious patience. They moved only when he moved, mimicking his gestures, offering raw materials without question. Communication was still wordless, but Eli was beginning to read their intent in posture and rhythm. One, slightly smaller than the rest, had a habit of clicking twice when handing him clay. Eli started calling it clicker in his head. Clicker worked fast, stacking half-dried bricks to dry while Eli smoothed the edges with damp cloth. Together, they established a rhythm. Gather, mold, stack, dry, repeat. The Relari stood apart, arms folded, visors dim. The remaining one, a taller unit with silver trim on its armor, had not spoken a word since its companion disappeared. Eli suspected it had a name or designation, but he didn't bother asking. There was no warmth in that one, only calculation. It watched Eli and the insectoids with veiled contempt, then turned to its own half-collapsed shelter and began dismantling it. Not rebuilding, studying, measuring, as if understanding failure mattered more than overcoming it. That morning, a wind picked up. Not a storm, not yet, but enough to carry sand across the hard work they'd laid. Eli narrowed his eyes and turned his shelter to shield the bricks. The insectoids followed suit, dragging their piles under crude awnings. He began building up the north wall higher, a windbreak for what was likely coming. Clicker approached and gently tapped Eli's shoulder, then pointed westward. Eli stood, a shimmer on the horizon. At first he thought it was another trick of the heat, but then it grew, steady, rhythmic. Something moving. Fast. A shadow crossed the sun. Overhead, a sleek aircraft roared past, its engines silent, but its presence loud. It circled once, then again, and descended like a hawk. Dust exploded outward. The others scattered. Even the Relari braced themselves. The craft settled without sound. It bore no markings, just black metal with a dull, obsidian finish. A hatch hissed open. Eli stepped forward, instincts taut. This wasn't part of the game. Not a test. This was something else. A single figure emerged, human, or close to it. Female, tall, with a lean build. She wore no armor, just a dark bodysuit threaded with faint lines of glowing blue. Her face was impassive, unreadable. She carried nothing in her hands. Eli Hart, she said. Her voice was sharp, precise. He didn't answer. You're making quite an impression. Still, he said nothing. She stepped closer. The craft behind her sealed itself and rose, disappearing into the sky as quickly as it had come. You've changed the pattern, she said. They were supposed to fail without assistance. That was the point. Eli's voice was low, dry from the wind. They didn't ask for help. No, she agreed. But they shouldn't be cooperating. You're corrupting the experiment. They're not data points, Eli said, his jaw tightening. They're just trying to survive. The woman tilted her head. Exactly. That's what we're testing. Raw adaptability. Individual thresholds. You're interfering with baseline data. Maybe your baseline's broken. A long pause followed. The wind blew harder now, ruffling their clothing, rattling loose bricks nearby. Do you know why you were chosen, Eli? She asked at last. He didn't reply. Because you survived the Delker collapse. 10 days underground. No food. No light. You kept your group alive with nothing but instinct and grit. That makes you interesting. But this, she gestured toward the structure. This is not survival. It's subversion. Eli stepped forward until he was close enough to see the faint network of veins beneath her skin, pulsing with light. If your test breaks down just because I worked with someone, maybe it wasn't a good test. She stared at him a moment longer, then turned. You have until dusk. After that, adjustments will be made. He watched her retreat, the wind swallowing her figure as she vanished beyond the next dune. There was no sound of departure, just silence. He turned back to the shelter. Clicker stood where he'd left him, head cocked. Eli didn't explain. He just picked up the next brick and resumed work. By midday, the wind became aggressive, biting and erratic. It tore at the edges of the camp, knocking over weak structures and grinding sand into every exposed crevice. The insectoids worked faster, following Eli's cues. They buried the base of each wall deeper, angled the outer bricks to deflect wind. Eli used his shirt as a dust mask, his hands blistered and red. The Relari finally moved. It approached slowly, holding a perfect sphere of compressed sand and resin, likely synthesized internally. It offered it to Eli without comment. Eli raised an eyebrow. Truce. The Relari inclined its head, once. Eli took the material and embedded it into the central support beam, reinforcing a weak spot. Together, they finished the core frame. As the light dimmed and the temperature dropped again, the shelter was no longer just a pile of bricks. It had form now, walls fully encircled, vents carefully placed, a ceiling frame of hardened clay slats and stone pressed into a sloped roof. Inside, the air was stable. Outside, the wind howled. Eli sat by the entrance, watching the desert turn dark. The insectoids huddled nearby, shielding their joints with their limbs. The Relari stood alone, but closer than before. Eli looked up. Above, the sky shimmered with invisible watchers. He knew the overseers hadn't left. They never did. But for now, there was warmth in the structure. Strength and unity. He didn't need to say it aloud. They were still different, alien, but they shared the same need. To endure. To build. To defy expectation. He closed his eyes, not in sleep, but in readiness for what came next. Because dusk had come. And something was about to change. The night didn't roar, it whispered. Subtle vibrations trembled through the sand, unsettling the foundation just enough to make Eli's eyes snap open. The wind had died hours ago, but now the silence felt too complete, the kind that pressed into the skin like humidity. The shelter remained stable, but the air inside had shifted, colder, heavier. He slipped out of the partial warmth, crawling to the low entrance flap. The desert lay stretched under a thick black sky. No stars, no moon, only a dull shimmer near the western horizon, as though light were struggling to emerge and failing. The insectoids stirred behind him. Clicker approached, limbs twitching in a tight, nervous rhythm. It pointed again, not to the sky this time, but to the ground. Eli followed its gaze and saw it. Faint pulses in the sand, like something massive moving just beneath the surface. The Relari stepped forward from its solitary vigil, scanning with a tool Eli hadn't noticed before, some kind of spectral reader, humming with quiet blue light. A screen flickered, showed nothing, and then flatlined. The Relari tapped the device, frowned. Even it didn't know what this was. Something was wrong. Then came the sound, a hollow chime, like bone striking metal. Repeated, rhythmic, growing closer. Eli tensed and glanced at his shelter. Strong, but not reinforced for a siege. If whatever was coming could move through sand, the walls wouldn't matter. It wasn't a matter of defense now. It was awareness, reaction, maybe negotiation. A new figure emerged from the dark, its form slow, unhurried. It walked upright, tall and shrouded in fabric that seemed to drink in light. No face was visible, just a smooth, reflective surface where a head should have been. Around its waist hung tools or weapons. It was impossible to tell, but it carried no visible threat. The insectoids scattered, but Clicker remained close to Eli, hissing low. The stranger stopped several feet away. It raised a hand, 3 fingers, long and boneless looking, and then slowly curled them inward, pointing not at Eli but at the structure behind him. "You built it." A voice echoed, not spoken, but pushed directly into Eli's mind. Calm, but foreign. Eli didn't respond aloud. He stood straighter, nodding once. "Cooperation," the voice said, almost tasting the word. "Deviation from control parameters. Adaptation beyond isolation." The Relari stepped forward, tense. It was not comfortable with this thing either. Its armor clicked softly as it drew closer to Eli. "What do you want?" Eli asked, his voice a rasp against the stillness. "To observe. To learn why you persist in resistance. Why unity blooms when control is withdrawn." Eli blinked. "Are you with the overseers?" "No. I was before them. I remain after them. I am what watches the watchers." Clicker hissed again, louder now. Behind it, more insectoids emerged, 6, maybe 7, forming a defensive arc around Eli. They didn't seem to know what this being was either, but they knew it shouldn't be here. The ground pulsed again, stronger. Then Eli saw it, the pyramid. It had changed. Where once it stood as a silent, inert mass of stone, now it flickered at its edges, revealing seams, technology hidden beneath ancient architecture. Symbols glowed faintly along its base, spinning like gyroscopic runes. The pyramid was no ruin, it was a device. A machine waiting for purpose. The stranger tilted its head. "You accelerated the awakening," it said. "Time folds around those who choose to connect rather than conquer." Eli stepped forward now. "What does it do?" "That depends," the stranger said. "Do you seek refuge or revolution?" "I want them to live," Eli said, gesturing toward the insectoids. "I want them to have a chance. That was never part of the game. I didn't sign up for a game." The being turned to the pyramid again. "It's beginning. Soon. Choices will be final. Divisions permanent. Your actions have changed more than this desert." Eli turned toward the Relari. "You understand what it's saying?" The armored figure nodded, slowly. "I believe the experiment controlled reality, but I see now it merely mirrors what lies within." A tremor rolled through the ground. Sand lifted in small plumes, swirling in geometric patterns that defied physics. The shelter shook but held. Bricks shifted slightly, still solid, still together. The stranger stepped backward, its form growing hazy. "You will be tested, Eli Hart. Not just for survival. For influence. For inheritance." And then it was gone. No flash, no fade, just absence, as if the space it occupied had always been empty. Eli turned slowly, taking in the now active pyramid, the sand pulses, the wide eyes of the creatures who had once been opponents, but were now allies in a cause none of them fully understood. Above them, The stars finally returned, but different. Aligned, clustered, blinking in a way that made Eli's skin crawl. As if watching, Clicker stepped beside him, placing a clawed hand gently on Eli's arm. "We'll finish the roof in the morning," Eli said quietly. And together, they went back to work, because the dawn would bring more than light. It would bring judgment. The sun did not rise. It bled upward, smearing the horizon in shades of copper and violet, a sky not born of earth, but something else, something altered. Eli stood outside the shelter, sand clinging to his boots, watching the light spread in unnatural silence. The pyramid hummed audibly now, low and resonant like a heartbeat beneath the surface. It pulsed every few seconds, releasing faint vibrations into the air and ground alike. Life, he realized. It wasn't a structure anymore. It was alive. The others sensed it too. The insectoids emerged in full, nearly a dozen of them now. Clicker remained close, his movements slower, more deliberate. The group formed a semicircle facing the pyramid, not in fear, but in reverence. Beside them, the Relari stood tall, visor flickering as if its sensors couldn't fully interpret what it saw. Yet it remained. No longer aloof, no longer judging, merely part of the whole. Eli felt at first a tug in his chest, not pain, but weight. Like something pulling from beneath his ribs, drawing out memory, fear, and instinct in equal measure. His mind sharpened, the desert falling away into abstract patterns, as if time were folding inward on itself. The pyramid shifted. A section of its base unfolded like petals of metal and light, revealing a staircase descending into its core. The air around it warped, dense with energy and something else, expectation. Eli moved forward. No one stopped him. The others followed in silence. Inside, the heat vanished. Cold replaced it, sterile and absolute. The staircase led them into a massive chamber, circular and vast, its walls covered in script that moved as they walked past. Language, logic, memories, they weren't reading it so much as absorbing it. He saw images flicker in his mind's eye, the overseers building their test, creating layers of psychological pressure, monitoring biological responses across species. The desert wasn't real, it was projected, a controlled simulation designed to provoke isolation and desperation. Every grain of sand was code. Every windstorm, a programmed test. But something had interfered. Him. His cooperation with the insectoids, his refusal to follow the rules, had disrupted the data flow. The pyramid was the failsafe, awakened only when the control system fractured. A voice echoed again, familiar now. The Watcher. "You've broken the loop, Eli Hart. They can no longer predict your outcome." Eli stood at the center of the chamber. The insectoids encircled him, heads bowed. The Relari stepped beside him and removed its helmet. Beneath was not a machine, but a face, not human, but deeply intelligent, with eyes that held time like sediment. It nodded once. They feared this, the Relari said quietly. That empathy would destabilize the experiment. Then they underestimated what makes us strong, Eli replied. Connection. Above them, light flared. A sphere of energy formed, casting a pale glow across the chamber. It hovered, silent, until the Watcher's voice returned. "Make your choice. Return to the surface, and the experiment continues. Remain here, and you will rewrite the code. But it will cost you." Eli understood. Staying meant losing his place in the world above. No return, no recognition. He would become part of this system, a new variable guiding future tests. Not a man, but a symbol. But leaving would mean this fragile unity, this flicker of resistance, would be erased, the cycle reset. He looked to Clicker, who raised his hand and pressed it to Eli's chest. "We're already rewriting it," Eli whispered. He stepped forward into the light. Everything dissolved. When his senses returned, he wasn't sure how much time had passed. He stood on a dune that overlooked the entire desert. Only now, it was different. Structures dotted the horizon, half-shelters, cooperative clusters, hybrid designs mixing alien and human engineering. The insectoids worked freely, trading materials. The Relari moved among them, heads unbowed. And the pyramid no longer pulsed with threat but glowed gently beneath the sky, a monument not to dominance, but to defiance. He touched his chest, still beating, still human, but something within him had changed. The others saw him and gathered. Clicker approached and gave a short trill of recognition. There were no more observers. No more tests. Just the aftermath of broken systems and the possibility of something new. Eli walked toward them, the sky above beginning to shimmer not with heat, but with potential. It wasn't survival anymore. It was evolution.